So that council that was called, so Constantine called that because he was actually seeing that there was a lot of kind of strange opposition going on, and he called all the the Gnostics. The Gnostic heresy was basically those who were saying there's some secret some secret knowledge that he's feeding me the answer. He's feeding me the answers. It's great. That there's some secret knowledge that the Bible has, and you have to come to this secret knowledge and all of that stuff. And so the Gnostics are kind of teaching this heresy to people, whereas and Constantine's going, something's going on with my people, and I need to have the Christians, the one true faith, come together. And so he's the first Roman emperor to call an ecumenical council, to bring all the patriarchs, all the churches that are out in these different regions to come together and kind of actually state a unified statement on this. And so the thing that's interesting is that they'll have some kind of issues with, well, who's going to be the defining factor of this? Is it going to be the Pope in Rome? And the Eastern side is going to say, no, we want a council, we want kind of like a parliament, and to get this figured out. Whereas who is it? Pope Leo? He's the one that says no, I'm the one that gets this kind of have the final say. And so there's going to be kind of this tension between all of the patriarchs in those regions to figure out what is definitely the say of the church. The liturgies right now kind of look a little different too in each of these regions, but they're not so much as oh, you gotta do it this one way, and that's it. And that's kind of a different route that we're not going to take right now. But that's a good question to ask. So that tension is starting right then and there. They're trying to figure out so what power does the Pope have? And basically he's saying, no, I sit on the chair of Peter, and it's getting defined more and more there. And the Eastern side, they're kind of going, what, really? How does this work? So, good question.
Answer your question.
Amy? Okay, he'll cover that. So yeah.
Not really. There was actually 3 at one time. But
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we'll get into that. That's yeah. It's kind of at the end of this. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to him. Anybody else has questions?
Yeah, another thing. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I didn't want to sing it again. Back with right before Constantine was emperor, Diocletian was emperor in Rome, and he was the first one to split the empire in half. And the first, it was all in Rome, but then he split, or part of it was in Rome, the other part was in what later became Constantinople, which was, what was it before that? I forget the name of it. Maria? Istanbul? That's what it is now. Pardon me? Thank you. I didn't hear you, but that's okay. I'm half deaf. I apologize. But Diocletian, he split the empire in half, and he thought it'd be easier to rule. And then he had what was it called, a Caesar, and I forget what was the other guy under him. You remember, Maria? Robbie? Where'd Robbie go? Is he sleeping? And he was right there. But so Diocletian, he was that real bad emperor who was really persecuting the Christians. He made an administrative order to split the empire in half, and the church kind of followed that then. And the time of the New Testament was written in what? Not English. Everybody thought, I was a Protestant, I thought everything was King James. Sorry, bad joke. The New Testament was written in Greek, very good. But the Catholic Church, up till today, writes everything in Latin. Oh, you guys are so good. Okay, but what happened was the eastern half of the empire was Greek, and they became Orthodox, and that's where the Greek Orthodox, and then it split, like the Russian Orthodox had their roots in that. Hey, there's Robbie. Come on back. Welcome. Let's give Robbie a hand. So that's what happened with the empire right before Constantine. And Constantine was actually a general. I said he fought and became emperor in the West. But where is Constantinople, though? It's in the East. He moved his administrative part of the empire to the East, while the church was based in Rome. And does that make any sense? Just a little clarification. I hope that helps. We're up to about the year 800. Is that the next one I have on your... there was Charles Martel, and he had a son, Pippin the Short. These guys all had cool names. Charles the Hammer, I like that because he hammered his foes in battle. And his son Pippin, they were the head of the Franks, and they didn't call themselves kings, but they called themselves mayor of the Franks, or mayor of the people. And what do I have here? Oh, the Lombards, yeah. In Italy, the Lombards were in the northern part of Italy, from like Rome up to what is now Switzerland. And but the Franks, Pippin, Charles Martel, and then later Charlemagne, became known as the protector of the Pope. And what happened is they went down and they fought with the Lombards, and they didn't really want the land, so they gave it to the Pope. And then the Pope became what is known as the Papal States. And the Papal States, how long did they last? Anybody know besides Maria and Alan? Go ahead, Alan, tell us when. Yeah, it's come in the 19th century. And it was actually a little later than that when the unified country of Italy came together. But Pippin, he fought the Lombards, and his son Charlemagne, he became king of the Franks in 771. And here, I don't have a map of it, but it's basically he forms what is known as the Holy Roman Empire, which is basically most of France, Germany, Switzerland, and parts of Poland, what is today. And on Christmas, what happened was Charlemagne went down to Rome, and Pope Leo III crowned him emperor of the Holy Roman Empire on Christmas Day in the year 800. There we go. Anybody seen this before? I've been here. That's Charlemagne. Where's his statue? I bet you've been there. It's outside the famous cathedral in France. Notre Dame, very good. How many been there? Yeah, he's right outside of it. And just down the street towards the Eiffel Tower is a... Oh, I don't remember that. I do remember about a half mile away down the road is this guy on a horse holding the sword, George Washington. Yeah. But that's a different story. There we go. He was a deeply pious man and wanted to bring the light of Christ to the pagans, which was back in northern Germany, which is the Saxons. And like we said with St. Boniface, the Saxons were, they practiced human sacrifice and ritual cannibalism. So they weren't nice people to be around. And the Saxons would cross into Charlemagne's territory and loot and plunder and terrorize the people there. And he fought them for 30 years. Charlemagne wanted them to become Catholic, and they resisted and kept fighting, and then after 30 years of fighting, he finally defeated them. And another thing, the Holy Roman Empire, here's what you were thinking, Alan, would last 1,000 years until 1806, when the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, he lost in battle to Napoleon. Carolingian, that's what is known as Charlemagne and his descendants. He started a Renaissance that revived arts, culture, education, and architecture. And it was this time period that the Cathedral of Notre Dame was starting to be built. Okay. Oh, thank you. Charlemagne, he was a strong leader, but his sons weren't. And the empire, it was there, but they were weak leaders. And this time period of the 9th and 10th centuries is known as Dark Ages, period of stagnation. They were getting attacks from the Vikings and from the Muslims, and this is the time when feudalism starts with the lords and vassals, and the church suffered through a lack of strong leadership. And Cluny, there was a monastery that was founded in 910. However, this monastery would be different. It would be under the authority of the Pope, and this would be a beginning of reform for the monasteries and the church. Before you go to the next slide, thank you. I didn't mention the schism of 1054. This is actually when the Eastern Church, which would become the Eastern Orthodox, split from the Roman Catholic Church. In our Epic series, they explain it really well. They were having disagreements with the Pope. The church there in Constantinople wanted to be the head of the church, and they didn't want to be under the Pope. So I can't remember these people's names. So the Pope sent a guy, a bishop or a cardinal, I think it was, to Constantinople to get these guys back in line. So he travels, it takes him like 3 months to get there, and he meets with a patriarch of Constantinople. I forget his name, you guys can look it up. Just Google Schism of 1054. And so they meet, and he says, you guys need to get back in line. And the patriarch says no. He says, okay, I'll let you guys think about it. I'll come back the next day. So they go part their ways. Next day, the cardinal comes back and says, what are you going to do? He says, no, we're not going to do it. So the cardinal says, okay, you're excommunicated. And then the patriarch says, no, you're excommunicated. So, and then while this was going on, I think the Pope died, I forget who it was, and there was some insults thrown back and forth, and so that was the beginning of the schism. A schism, the definition of a schism means that they don't recognize the authority of the Pope. That's what a schism is. Whereas a heresy doesn't follow the doctrine. I got that written down here. Yeah, heresy denies the doctrine of the church, and schism denies the authority of the Pope. So that's the schism of 1054, basically. Father, you have any comments, rebuttals? Robbie? Okay, thanks. You got Alan there too. He can help. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, I like this part. I don't know if they look that good, but I think that's just pretty awesome. Actually, they said that's a Templar. There were like 4 different orders. Was that what they were called, Maria? Yeah, that's what Father says. And here's a ancient depiction from, I can't remember what the date was on that. It's like the 14th or 15th century. And this is a little more up to date. Okay, in order to have go ahead and add the next one. Yeah, those guys are pretty cool too. There are 4 essential elements to have a crusade. The first part is they have to take on the cross. They have to make a public vow, and they have to put a cross on their clothes. Here, let me get my... That's the first part. They have to take on the cross. Second part is it has to be sanctioned by the church, has to be endorsed by the Pope, which the first all the crusades were. That's it coming up. But they also granted, the third thing is special privileges, whereas if you went on a crusade, you were usually gone for a couple of years, and the protections were that your family was protected and your property at home. You can't lose your property being gone so long. And indulgence was the prime motivator of going on the crusade. And it says a study of the medieval charters that was written for the Crusaders indicates the vast majority of Crusaders were motivated not by greed, but by the love of Christ and concern for the salvation of their own souls. Okay, let's go to the next one. There were 8 numbered crusades from that time period of, what did I have there, 1254, or 8 numbered crusades against Muslims, the pagans, and heretics. The Holy Land at this time was, before this, there were ancient Christian lands, and Christians from Europe and Northern Africa would make pilgrimages to to Jerusalem and Israel. And what happened was the Muslims came in and took over Jerusalem and Palestine there, and they would not let Christians come anymore. So that's why the Pope, I forget his name, Urban, yeah, thank you. You went to the Epic too, didn't you? Pope Urban said this is unacceptable. We have to make the crusades so the Christians can go to it on their pilgrimages. And on the first crusade, most of the crusaders returned home afterwards, and then in 1099, what was that movie they talk about? The one with Orlando Bloom. Kingdom of Heaven, thank you. I did not see it. I refused to see it because I knew it was going to be bad. But, and I knew they were going to rewrite history. And they depict the Christians there as murderers and rapists and everything, and they weren't. It said that in the Battle of Jerusalem, they called it a massacre, and they said the blood flowed to the ankles, which is not true, just another urban legend. Crusades were not against Jews, they were against, like I said before, Muslims, pagans, and heretics, and they are not a source of modern tension between the East and West, between Islam and the West. They said about 100, it was before World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm went to, where was it? You remember that? But it was one of these Muslim generals who fought in the Crusades, and he was appalled by the condition of the guy's grave and everything. It was basically in ruin, and the Kaiser rebuilt it out of his own money to make it, so people can visit it. But it is not a modern, it's not a source of tension to the modern world. That's just another myth. Questions about Crusades. In the third page there, I give a couple references. Is that the formed ones? Yeah, that formed one is really good. If you listen to that, it's about an hour long, and it can do a far better explanation than I can give. Any questions so far on Crusades or up till Charlemagne? Or yeah, I see some of you sleeping. I'll try to go faster here. Go ahead, Father. The scholasticism of the 12th and 13th centuries. Saint Anselm of Canterbury, he is considered the father of scholasticism, and this is when the first universities start in Oxford, England, Paris, and University in Naples in Italy. Those were the three big ones. And this is when they sought to integrate theology, philosophy, and sacred scripture. And in 1210, this is when the Franciscans start to get organized by St. Francis. And then in 1216, St. Dominic, he starts the order of the preachers, which become Dominicans, who are our previous priests. Father Mike and Father Bob were Dominicans. People says, how can you tell the difference? Dominicans wear white, Franciscans are in brown, and another joke, sorry. St. Bonaventure, is he on there? Yeah. He was a Franciscan scholar, and he was a great admirer of St. Augustine and Augustine's theology, and they call him a theologian and philosopher, but he himself didn't consider himself a philosopher. He thought that philosophy and theology are just kind of together, and it's later when my favorite, St. Thomas Aquinas, comes along, and where he brings philosophy and theology together. And St. Thomas Aquinas was Dominican. He was from Italy, and his teacher at the main scholar he studied under was St. Alexander the Great. He was also Dominican, but he was German. And if you go in our chapel, you'll see we have, the first one is St. Alexander the Great, and about the fourth one down is St. Thomas Aquinas. However, that picture of Thomas Aquinas isn't correct. You'll see what I have here. Thanks to Google, the correct ones. Go ahead, let's... what do you think you'll turn an angel when you die? St. Thomas Aquinas is very disappointed. Who's that second guy? It's not Father Gale. I heard Father Gale over there. No. It is requisite for the relaxation of the mind that we make use from time to time of playful deeds and jokes. That's St. John Paul II. Thomas Aquinas is the most influential scholastic theologian, and he taught at the University of Paris. He believed that the contemplation of God through natural order, through ultimate truths, were revealed only by studying revelations of the Bible. Okay, his two greatest works are the Summa Contra Gentiles and the Summa Theologica, which are both attempt to find the Christian faith on rational principles. Oh, you weren't supposed to go ahead yet. I knew he did. That's okay. Where was I? His philosophy emphasizes human reasoning, life of the material order, and the individual's participation in personal salvation. I'm sorry, I got new teeth last week, and I don't want to take them out and gross everybody out, but I'm having a hard time with them. Okay, let's go to this one. Faith and reason, while distinct but related, are two primary tools for processing the data of theology. St. Thomas believed that both were necessary, or rather that the confluence of both was necessary for one to obtain true knowledge of God. Thomas blended Greek philosophy and Christian doctrine by suggesting that rational thinking and the study of nature, like revelation, were valid ways to understand truths pertaining to God. According to St. Thomas, God reveals himself through nature, so to study nature is to study God. The ultimate goals of theology in Thomas' mind are to use reason to grasp the truth about God and to experience salvation through that truth. Now you can go back to the other one. Okay, everybody saw it now. Okay, Inquisition started. This is, there are actually two different Inquisitions. The first medieval Inquisition in 1231. Let me go back to here. Oh boy, I'm not going to read all this, it's too long. The Inquisitions, the modern view is distorted and not accurate. Pope Gregory IX, he was the first one to start it, and he was actually, there was a heresy with the Albigensians in southern France, and what they would do is inquisitors would travel from town to town, and they would announce themselves, and they'd give people 30 days to come before them and to come and recant of their heretical beliefs, and then come right with the church. And there was a lot of modern thinking of torture and stuff later on. Torture was used, and there's also a modern misconception that the Inquisition was against the Jews and Muslims in Spain. We'll talk about that a little bit later here, near the end. But I didn't make too much on the Inquisition. There's a couple references I put in there. I've rewatched them. They're very good. They're not too long, and they have a good explanation of the medieval Inquisitions, but it was in response to heresy that was going on in Europe. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, doesn't it look lovely? Who has not heard of the plague? Okay, I think everybody has. This had a dramatic effect on not just Europe, but Asia and Africa. It originated in China, and it first came to Venice and Genoa in Italy in 1347, and it ravaged the rest of Europe in just 4 years. People didn't know what the cause was, and it was fleas from the black rat. And the last point there, 31% of the people of Europe died, almost 24 million people. But the point I really want to come across is the one above it, where what happened was when people were dying from this, it usually took up to 3 weeks for a person to die from the plague. If you really want to be grossed out, Google that and hit images. It's not pleasant, but it's like I said, it took up to 3 weeks for the person to die. And what happened was the priests and the other good people were taking care of the sick people, and what happened is the priests would contract it also, and they died. And this had a devastating effect on the church for the next couple generations. So, like I said, it left a void. And then we're coming up to proto-Protestants. There's two guys. First one, John Wycliffe. He was an Englishman. He was a professor at Oxford, and he was a heretic, and he is known for one of the first Englishmen to translate the Bible into English. But the church didn't really have a problem with that, but the problem they had with him was that he did it without the church's authority. And when he translated the Bible, he mistranslated many parts, especially the New Testament. He attacked the veneration of saints, the sacraments, the papacy, transubstantiation, and he taught that the Pope could be of error, and that the Pope was not necessary for governance of the church, and the oral confessions of sins was not necessary. Okay, thank you. John Huss, he was a Bohemian Czech. He was a follower of Wycliffe, and he also claimed that sacred tradition was incorrect. He rejected the Pope's universal jurisdiction and authority over the whole church. John Huss, the Pope sent delegates from Rome to get him to reconcile with the church, and he wouldn't. He played games with them, and it went on for quite a while, and they gave many attempts to recant, and he did not, and church finally said enough of you, so they burnt him at the stake. John Wycliffe, maybe he was a little smarter or a little more slick. He was in England, and the Pope sent delegates. So what did he do? He went to Europe, and he traveled a lot. He had other followers across Europe, and the Pope and his delegates were looking for him, and they never caught up with him, and he eventually died of a stroke. Both of these guys, Wycliffe and Huss, are revered by the Protestants. How do you do this? Oh, all right. Now here's some good people. Not. How many know about Henry VIII? What's he famous for? Huh? How many? Can you name them? Catherine of Aragon was one. Anne Boleyn. Are you Googling? I think you got them all there. What happened was Catherine of Aragon, which is basically Spain. Who was her parents? Anybody know who Catherine of Aragon's parents were besides you two? Go ahead, Holly. And what were they famous for? Yeah, I was trying to ignore the Spanish Inquisition, but yeah, they were responsible for sending Columbus to search for a passage to the West Indies, which later became known as finding America. Europe at this time was very, the royal monarchies were all intermarried with each other, and Henry VIII, his brother, was actually married to Catherine of Aragon, and he died, and Henry married him, and I found something online. I think this sums it up pretty good. It's not too long. Henry became king in 1509, which is the year he married his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She had been married to Henry's brother Arthur, but he died in a terrible accident. Henry got special permission from the Pope to marry Catherine. At this time, it had been seen wrong to marry your brother's widow. However, you have to remember now, he has permission from the Pope, and the Pope said this was no problem. Okay, remember that. Henry was a very proud man, and first few years of his reign, he enjoyed himself as king. He hunted, loved large banquets, and was good at all sports. And what was one thing he always wanted? A son, correct. He wanted a son so he could carry on his Tudor surname. But what happened with Catherine? Yeah. In the 1500s, attitudes to girls and women were very different. Henry wanted to leave a son in charge of his kingdom, not a daughter. Unfortunately, Henry and Catherine had only one child that lived, a baby daughter, whose name was Mary. Henry was worried and he was desperate for a son. Some historians think that Henry thought he was being punished. He thought God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow, even though he had permission from the Pope. So what did Henry do? He had an affair with Anne Boleyn, but actually he had an affair with her sister, Mary Boleyn, before that. And he was having an affair with Anne Boleyn while he was married. And what happened? Anne got pregnant. So with Anne, he now had a chance to have a son he desperately wanted. However, for this baby to be his proper heir, he had to be married to Anne. Henry asked the Pope for a divorce. And what did the Pope say? No. Why did the Pope say no? Pardon me? I didn't hear you, I'm sorry. Okay. Actually, what happened was Charles V was Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and he was the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, and that was the main reason why the Pope wouldn't grant a divorce to him, and also Charles then later captured the Pope and wouldn't let him out. So now he had a chance for a son with Anne, and the Pope was going to spoil it. So what did Henry do? He said, I'm King of England. And the Protestants in England said, you don't have to listen to the Pope. So what did Henry do? Yep. He made himself the head of the church, which became the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, in 1534, and he got a divorce. And what happened? Anne had a baby, and what did she have? Another girl, who was then Elizabeth. Very good. So that's how, a quick little summary of how Henry VIII and the Church of England, he defied the Pope, even though he was blessed by the Pope to marry Catherine. They were married for, I think, 23 years, and he divorced her, and then Henry would later have 5 more wives in a period of 10 years, and that's what happened there in England. Let's go to the next one. Oh, sorry. Where's Mother? Let's start a church. 40,000 of them. A little about Martin Luther. He was born in 1483 and he died in 1546. He He was raised by two very strict parents who used to beat him physically a lot. He once said his mother caned him for stealing the nut until the blood flowed. This formed Luther's thinking concerning God the Father. He believed when the Bible spoke about God's righteousness, it referred to God the Father as being very judgmental and strict to those humans who would not measure up to God's perfection. This caused him not to only perform many penances and devotions in order to please God, but also caused him great depression as well, because he knew that he could never attain perfection himself. It talks about Reformation, but a Reformation is where an institution, tradition, or country is brought back to its original principles. Contrary to a Reformation is a revolution, where an institution, tradition, or country is obliterated and a new institution, tradition, or country is created. Luther's actions were definitely a revolution, as new ideas, dogmas, and beliefs were created 1,500 years after Christ. In no way was the church brought back to the original principles by Luther. It is more appropriate to label Luther as a revolutionary rather than a reformer. And Luther, he is known for sola scriptura, which is scripture alone, and then sola fidei, is that it, Maria? Which was faith alone. And he, like the other ones we were with John Huss and John Wycliffe, he denied the papacy, the sacraments, except marriage and baptism. That was the only ones. Or was it Eucharist? Okay, thank you. And I lost my train of thought. Let's go back. Oh, well. I had other notes, now I can't find them. But Luther, Robbie, where are you? You're going to talk about this a little more when you do your okay, so he'll go more in detail. Luther was an Augustinian monk, priest. He had a doctorate in theology, and he was in Wittenberg, Germany, and they just celebrated the 500 years of nailing his 95 theses on the Wittenberg door. Back then, that's what the different scholars would do when they wanted to have a discussion of their different thinkings and stuff. They would nail them onto the door at the university, and that was common back then, and everybody thinks that Luther was the only one to do it, but he wasn't. And he challenged the Pope, and the Pope responded, and Robbie's going to hopefully get more into it. He was a pretty vile man, and he was very good at insulting people. One of the persons who actually defended the Pope against Luther was none other than King Henry VIII. And I didn't have that. I think that's the last one. But Henry VIII responded to him and telling him of his errors, with the Catholic Church, and Luther then responded. You can Google that too, and he was not very nice in his response back to Luther. I don't have it right here in front of me. I thought I did. But he was a pretty vile guy. Maria, I don't have any more. Questions, comments, rebuttals? Come on. No. Because Robbie's going to do that. The Council of Trent is after the Reformation. There were two main guys in the Reformation, Martin Luther and John Calvin, which Luther started the Lutheran Church. John Calvin started the Reformed or the Presbyterian Church. And that's what Robbie's going to get into, and he's going to go from this time period on. The Council of Trent was in response to the Protestant Revolution. I call it revolution, not a Reformation. Because Luther wanted to abolish the church. He didn't want to try to change it. He just wanted something all new. Come on. Focus, you guys. I see your... okay. Alan, Holly? Nothing? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Awesome. Well, let's give Wally a hand, everybody. That was awesome. Wally is so impressive. He's always reading about the church and learning more, and I think that's fantastic. So it's an example we all can follow. So thanks for sharing with us tonight. It's awesome. Awesome. All right, well, it's about that time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for tonight. We'll be back again, same time and place next week. So I don't know, this might be a little bit hard for everybody to see, but maybe for those of you in the front row, you can kind of lead the way. We'll end with this great prayer by St. Thomas Aquinas. All right, if you can't see it, just kind of pray with us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Grant me, O Lord, my God, a mind to know you, a heart to seek you, wisdom to find you, conduct pleasing to you, faithful perseverance in waiting for you, and a hope of finally embracing you. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. Thank you all. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.